So you've received a penalty notice from the IRS because your nonprofit organization didn't file its Form 990 on time. Is there any way to get out of paying that penalty? Absolutely. The law says that if you can prove to the satisfaction of the IRS that you had a reasonable cause for filing late, you don't have to pay the penalty. You do this by writing a letter to the IRS explaining why you were late and asking them to abate the penalty. This request for abatement has to be in writing, and it has to be signed under penalties of perjury. The IRS gives some pretty vague guidelines as to what reasonable cause is and as to exactly how you go about having your penalties abated. In fact, if you read what the IRS says about penalty abatement, it almost seems hopeless. It almost seems like probably no organization would qualify for abatement. But that is very misleading. If you have not deliberately and willfully neglected your filing requirement, then most likely you're a pretty good candidate for penalty abatement. Making a reasonable cause argument really is more of an art than a science. Sometimes you can simply write a letter that says, hey, we're sorry we goofed, we won't let it happen again, please don't make us pay the penalty. And sometimes that'll work, but most of the time it requires more of an explanation and more of a logical, structured argument as to why you deserve to have your penalties abated. In order to write a really effective reasonable cause letter, you need to have a pretty good understanding of what the IRS will accept as reasonable cause and what it won't. You need to have a good understanding of what mitigating factors are and how those are different from circumstances beyond the filer's control. You also need to understand the concepts of willful neglect, responsible actions, and ordinary business care and prudence. Simply writing several paragraphs about how great your organization is and how important your exempt purpose is and all the harm that will befall your organization if you have to pay the penalty, that's just not going to get you anywhere with the IRS. You need a logical, structured argument that makes it easy for the IRS to see why you fit within the reasonable cause abatement provisions of the law. Ideally, you should be able to write a letter that won't put the IRS to sleep and that won't make the IRS think that you really don't have a good reason and that you're just grasping at straws. I provide materials on my website that will make it easy for you to craft a very effective reasonable cause abatement request letter to the IRS, and it will give you confidence that you have written the best letter that you can and you haven't left out any reasons that are available to you to request abatement. Writing a reasonable cause letter to the IRS is not exactly rocket science, but there is a right approach and a wrong approach. And you definitely want to use the right approach because that will make the difference between a successful letter and a failure.